Hello, my name is Lori Thomas, and I'm Interim Director of UNC Charlotte's Urban Institute, where I also serve as the Executive Director of the Institute for Social Capital. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the fifth in a five-part series of virtual conversations leading up to our annual event on November 18th, the Schul Forum. The theme of this year's forum is economic mobility, which continues to remain a part of our community consciousness since it first became a part of our civic agenda in 2015. The Charlotte Urban Institute has been a part of a community-wide effort to better understand the challenges we face in improving upward economic mobility. Our role has been that of a research partner, not only looking at the historical conditions that led to our community's poor ranking, but also at some of the policy solutions that might be the key to building a more equitable and promising future for all of our residents. We are excited to dig deeper into issues and policy solutions through this year's Schul Forum. The forum was established in 2019 with an endowed gift from two longtime supporters of the university, alumna Marianne Schul and her husband, Norm, who served as the Urban Institute's founding director in 1969, over 50 years ago. The Schuls have long believed in the Institute's power to bring the Charlotte region together in dialogue around important policy issues, especially when that dialogue is informed by research taking place here at UNC Charlotte. And that brings us to our second sponsor of the Schul Conversations. In 2019, the Gambrell Foundation made a multi-year commitment to support research at the Urban Institute focused on the issue of economic mobility. An important component of that research is the Gambrell Faculty Fellows, a program that funds faculty who are committed to exploring more deeply how issues within their respective fields might further our understanding of economic mobility. With these online forums, we're really pleased to highlight some of their work. In this conversation series, we focused on housing affordability, accessible transportation, health outcomes and health equity, the racial wealth gap, and today we will focus on workforce development. We have welcomed local leaders and local and national experts to these conversations, and we've examined the nuanced relationship economic mobility has in all of these arenas, functioning as both an outcome of historic and ongoing exclusionary practices and a factor in our community's current and future well-being. These five conversations have been leading us to the Schul Forum that will feature a panel discussion of local leaders on where we are now and what's different and how we move the needle 7 years after Raj Chetty and colleagues published their national rankings on economic mobility. Our featured speaker for that event will be Dr. Andre Perry of the Brookings Institution. Dr. Perry is most recently the author of Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. Dr. Perry will challenge our framing of economic mobility, both how we understand the problem and how we work to solve it. The event will be virtual, so there will be room for all, and you can see the chat for registration information, and we hope you will join us there. But let's get to today's Schul conversation about workforce development and economic mobility. We've talked a lot locally about workforce development, about ensuring college and career readiness and developing pathways to mobility enhancing jobs, about attracting employers to our region who pay family-sustaining wages, about addressing the significant system barriers still faced by Black and Latinx business owners who want to grow their companies and their workforce. To introduce our guest and to help us dig in here, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator for today's panel, Mr. Ely Portillo. Ely directs our community engagement and research translation efforts here at the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute. He joined us from the Charlotte Observer, where he worked for a decade as a reporter, primarily covering business, real estate, and local politics. Ely is a Washington, D.C. area native and holds a degree in political science from Harvard University. Ely, I now turn it over to you to introduce our panelists and lead this Schul conversation.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. As Lori said, I'm Ely Portillo, Assistant Director of Outreach and Strategic Partnerships here at the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute. I've been in Charlotte since 2009, and for a majority of that time, I was a business reporter at the Charlotte Observer. During my years writing about growth and development in this city, I watched the skyline bloom in the wake of the Great Recession as more and more companies moved in and existing businesses financed a wave of new office towers and apartments. I interviewed a lot of leaders like Janet LaBar, who's with us today, about what was driving this boom, and wrote stories about industries like fintech, logistics, and healthcare that seem to have limitless growth potential in Charlotte. At the same time, I also wrote a lot about another narrative. The Chetty study that came out over 7 years ago ranked the Charlotte region 50th out of 50 among large metropolitan regions for economic mobility, landed like a bombshell with local leaders, prompting introspection and driving people to seek new solutions. How could Charlotte be growing so much and yet remain so inequitable? Why weren't more people able to take advantage of the opportunities that new companies and new employers brought with them? In short, how can more people share in Charlotte's booming prosperity? That's the central question we'll be addressing today, and we'll be looking at it through the lens of workforce development. As Lori mentioned, so far in this series of virtual panels, we've talked about topics including the racial wealth gap, disparities in transportation and transit access, how housing affects people's future and their stability, and the health inequities that take years off the lives of too many of our residents. Today's discussion about jobs, workforce development, and employment bridges a lot of these topics. For many people, a job and the income that comes with that are the first steps towards building wealth. Transportation access is intimately tied to employment. Having a job affords many people the ability to provide stable housing for their families and in neighborhoods with more opportunities, while unemployment is a major factor locking many people out of those neighborhoods. And for many Americans, a job is the means by which they access health insurance and care. In short, employment is the linchpin of a thriving, secure, productive life for many families. So, how can we improve access to jobs? And not just any jobs, but stable, well-paying, secure jobs that will grow with the future and that people can build a future around. We know that the COVID pandemic impacted women and workers of color more severely, as well as costing many jobs in hospitality, retail, and other lower income industries. The pandemic exacerbated existing inequities in the workforce, with many white-collar workers staying home behind their Zoom screens, while shelf stockers and delivery drivers kept society running. In North Carolina, unemployment jumped to almost 14% as roughly 800,000 jobs disappeared statewide in a matter of months. Nationwide, we know that the unemployment rate for all workers has fallen to 4.6% in the third quarter this year. But unemployment is nearly double that at 8.4% for Black workers and significantly higher at 6.2% for Latino workers. Now, with the economy roaring back, we find ourselves in the midst of a massive realignment, what's been termed the Great Resignation by many. Workers are quitting their jobs in unprecedented numbers, changing careers, or even dropping out of the workforce entirely. Employers are scrambling to fill open positions, from high-tech industries that rely on a pipeline of science, technology, engineering, and math workers to restaurants that can't have their kitchens. It's become apparent that without enough workers and workers with the right skills, we will all eventually suffer. Figuring out how to build the workforce of tomorrow is vital, not just for workers and their families, but for all of us, if we want our region and our nation to thrive. We've got a great panel lined up today to discuss these issues. Janet LaBar leads the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, the point group for economic development in our region. In her role, Janet both represents local employers' needs, working to help them build and find the workforce that they need to get their job done, and lures the next big companies considering relocating to our region. Dr. Fallon Wilson is Vice President of Tech Policy at the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council and co-founder at Black Tech Futures. Her work focuses on creating more paths to digital equity and ways into the digital workforce for underrepresented communities, as well as creating local, sustainable Black tech ecosystems. And we have UNC Charlotte's own Dr. Tianka Crocker. She's an assistant professor in the School of Social Work with a focus on digital inclusion strategies. She's conducting a research project as a Gambrell faculty fellow that examines whether barriers to technology access are keeping Charlotte workers from competing for well-paid, middle-skilled jobs in the digital economy. So welcome to all our panelists, and let's turn first to Dr. Wilson. If you could introduce yourself and tell us about your scholarship and work with that you do to address some of these issues.
Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon, or East Coast, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction, and so excited to be among amazing sister scholars and practitioners in this work. As Eli shared, I wear two hats. Nationally, I am the Vice President of Tech Policy at the Multicultural Media Telecom Internet Council, which is a 35-year-old legacy civil rights organization dedicated to ensuring that communities of color have access to the worlds of innovation through broadcasting, through streaming, through internet access. We cover a lot of terrain in the space of the innovation economy and making sure we have national policy that reflect equity in that space. And locally, I wear many hats. I am the co-founder of Black Tech Futures Research Institute, where we operate in 4 cities at this current moment to really assess and build their Black tech ecosystems with our Black Tech Ecosystem Index, which is about 30 indicators across 120 metrics. And we really can score a city. Let me tell you, cities do not like to be scored. They don't like to be shamed. And ideally, Charlotte does not like to be ranked, hence the conversation we're having now. And so we really provide a roadmap for how interventions can happen. And so I've been doing that work for a moment. And of course, and I connect with both Janet and with Dr. Crocker because we all work on this work of building like digital pipelines. And so my volunteer work at the local level in Nashville is really assessing our ability to have digital inclusion access. We just finished a citywide assessment to ensure who had what, because we can't talk about, I tell the joke all the time, people want to talk about media disinformation and the world of technology and innovation, but we know that at least 30% of Black people don't have access to the internet, let alone Latino communities and our tribal communities. And so it's kind of like, oh, we're taking on Facebook, but oh my gosh, most people don't understand what you're doing because they don't have access. And so spending a lot of time on that, it's going to be a very popular topic now because, you know, the policy domain and the billions of dollars that are coming down from infrastructure is going to make this a popular topic for everyone in the country, from companies to municipalities, community organizations. And so on many levels, I get to wear both the national hat, a local hat, and sometimes hold my municipality accountable for how they think about these issues of workforce development, which always for me will always mean an ecosystem. And I can't talk about pipeline without talking about education and the other institutes that really create the system.
Thank you for that introduction. And you're right that cities don't love being ranked. And I know, as I said in my introductory spiel, Charlotte certainly is still stinging at being ranked 50 out of 50 for economic mobility. And we'll talk more about those topics. Next, let's turn to Janet LaBar. And why don't you tell us about yourself, your work with the Business Alliance, and what you do?
Great, Ely. Thank you so much for the invitation to Lori and to UNC Charlotte and the Urban Institute for having me here today. As a quick background about myself, so I'm the president and CEO of the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, as you mentioned. I am in my 19th year as a regional economic development practitioner. I've been here in the Charlotte area now for 2.5 years. And prior to that, I was leading a similar regional public-private partnership in Portland, Oregon, in the Portland metro area. I did that for 5 years. And then the 12 years before that, 10 of those 12 were spent at the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, doing, again, very similar work, all but the CEO position. And then my actual start for 2.5 years there in Phoenix was at the Maricopa Community Colleges in workforce development. So I actually have a very big heart for workforce development, for the role of community colleges in particular, and higher education when it comes to skilling folks and into jobs, into what industry needs. So at the Alliance, our organization is in our 3rd year of operation. We are the successor to what was the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, serving the city of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, and then another organization called the Charlotte Regional Partnership, which had a more regional footprint mirroring what we do today. That was really responsible for marketing the region, attracting companies in, and certainly working with local governments across the region. Today, the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance is the voice of business, and we're the only regional economic development organization that works to grow the economy, that's advocating for business, and that convenes diverse stakeholders. And this year, we put 3 key strategies out. In that work was, hey, how do we make sure that the Charlotte region bounces back from COVID and emerge from the pandemic faster than other competitive markets? Second, how do we make sure that we're really achieving and driving towards racial equity in the business community? And I know we're going to talk a lot more about that today. And then third, what do we see is regional transformation over the next 30 years? And Eli, I know this is a spot in particular you're interested in. We've talked a lot at the Alliance with our stakeholders and in the community around transportation and how do we invest in regional transportation infrastructure, as you mentioned. That is really integral when it comes to economic mobility. So the role of transportation, how do we think about industry innovation, especially as it relates to education and higher education? And so those, again, I know are topics that we'll touch on today, but thanks again for having me. I'm excited for the discussion.
Great, thank you. And our next panelist is Dr. Crocker. If you could introduce yourself, tell us about your work, what you do, and what you've studied in Charlotte as some obstacles for people accessing digital jobs.
Absolutely. Hello, Eli, and everyone joining us today virtually. I want to thank the Urban Institute for the opportunity to talk about this topic, particularly from the perspective of working families and individuals. As you mentioned, I'm Tianka Crocker, a digital equity and inclusion researcher and social work educator. I've been using technology as a critical resource for social change for over a decade, and specifically studying digital equity as a path for economic opportunity for the last 6 years, working with groups such as Inten and Google Fiber and the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. So as a fellow with the Charlotte's Urban Institute, I've had the opportunity to design and pilot a survey instrument to capture Charlotteans' digital economy attitudes. And why? For the purpose of understanding more about opportunity and upward mobility is why. We've seen the digital economy become a resilient sector of the economy during recent downturns in terms of staving off job losses. That goods and services produced in this sector are growing rapidly, accounting for $2.1 trillion. According to conservative estimates from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So let's really frame this for working families and people earning low income. There's an opportunity to significantly increase wages through access to digital resources. So looking at affordable broadband, digital devices, and the literacy to know how to use technology to enhance your well-being and to get ahead. So this could be whether it's an entrepreneur who needs to book clients in a virtual environment, a worker making a career transition into their local digital ecosystem, or a worker who just wants to become more tech savvy so that they can step into a role that offers some of that flexibility in life to work remotely and at varying hours. So these increased resources lead to wages that can help people pay bills, rear children, invest, and buy homes in the communities that many of their family members may have lived in as renters for generations, but haven't had the opportunity to invest in as homeowners. So I've launched this online survey using postcards and online recruitment strategies, specifically in West Charlotte and the 28208 zip code, and even more specifically within census tracts 40 and 41, because they are opportunity zones, which we can talk about a little bit later, to capture digital experiences in a number of key areas around skills, experiences with the economy, attitudes towards jobs in the economy. And what I'm seeing in sort of early data, we're still in the data collection process, is that there are some key areas where people would like more skills that have been identified as skills that are common in positions of opportunity, where people can transition to higher wage opportunities with these particular skills. So we're seeing things such as communication, written and verbal communication, skills, support around how to develop skills around teamwork, organizational skills are rising to the top in sort of our early findings. So we're hoping to wrap up the survey in December, and that information will be publicly available through my site at UNC Charlotte, and also hopefully through the Urban Institute as well. So that's a little bit about who I am and the work that I'm doing as a fellow.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. it sounds like everyone is looking at the same sorts of issues, but through different lenses and through different focuses. So we're going to do a few rounds, 2 rounds of questions now. And I just want to encourage everyone who is watching, if you have questions or comments, drop them in the chat. They're going to monitor those and pose as many as we can as well. And also want to encourage our panelists. We had an awesome preparation conversation for this where everyone was really excited and talking. So if you want to jump in on each other's answers, I'm going to direct questions, but I'm just encouraging you, please jump in on each other. So let's start with Janet. You have a regional perspective of not just Charlotte, but our surrounding counties. And I know you're talking constantly with employers and people in different industries about what they need in the workforce. So what are you finding is most in demand? What jobs are companies having trouble filling? And how are your workforce efforts at the Business Alliance trying to address that?
Yeah, thank you, Eli. We have a fantastic research team, and we also are grateful to partner again with UNC Charlotte and the Urban Institute and others in the business to really understand, what does the framework of workforce look like in our region at any given time. And so I think our most recent data set shows that of the target sectors that I know are tracking at the Alliance that we try to grow and attract into the market, which are advanced manufacturing, financial services, technology, healthcare, life sciences, and logistics. There are specific jobs that are in demand in those sectors, and I won't run through every single one, but I'll just pull out a few of them. For example, in advanced manufacturing, which we know has a trajectory. Those are great high-wage, high-paying jobs, and you don't necessarily need a 4-year degree to actually, progress on that trajectory of economic mobility and career trajectory there. So things like mechanics, distribution occupations within that, and machine operators within advanced manufacturing are in demand. Within financial services, again, software and computer occupations, just generally financial managers. Within technology, software developers, computer systems engineers, systems analysts, and then in healthcare, life sciences, RNs, life and physical occupations, healthcare support occupations, which again, very good paying jobs. You need, potentially some certifications. You could get some benefit from 2-year degrees on that. Within those occupations to start, and then potentially as you're growing your career, also get some advanced education. And then in logistics, truck drivers continue to still be in demand. And I think we know from being in the COVID environment and supply chain disruption, until we see fully automated 18-wheeler trucks on the roadways, truck drivers are still can be a very lucrative job opportunity for so many. One thing that you hit on that I wanted to come back to is where we are seeing some workforce shortages in our market. And I know within North Carolina, we almost over-index in terms of maybe some of the professional services jobs, things within arts, advertising, communication. We're over-indexing still on government, public administration jobs, but where we are falling short in terms of job seekers per job opening in the state, again, of North Carolina, are in STEM, career clusters, in health science, in IT, in finance. And so, as I just mentioned, we've got this, cluster of in-demand jobs that this market needs, that employers are looking for. And yet, we're falling short when it comes to the amount of job seekers that are applying for these jobs in the industries. And so even outside of COVID, even outside of the Great Resignation, we as a community really still need to solve for that shortage and solve for that gap, or else as a market, we will see, those jobs and those employers potentially locate elsewhere, grow their investment elsewhere, expand their operations elsewhere, which really leaves us, in a vulnerable position as a community to make sure that we're not, in a position to vie for those jobs. And then I just want to mention as well that when it comes to the Alliance, and the conversation around Ross Chetty and 50th out of 50, You're right. I think Dr. Wilson said no city really likes to be ranked. We happen to be dead last there. And I think, if we were in the top 5 or 10, I'm sure we'd feel the other way about feeling ranked. However, because economic mobility is such, that was a 30-year study. He has publicly said he's not going to do that study again. There are updates. I'm looking forward to tuning into the next Shul conversation to understand where that work is progressing and continues to live on. But there's a real continuum of providers, partners, programs, of policies that's needed to make sure that we are really addressing and closing those gaps in economic and socioeconomic disparities. And so at the Alliance, our job is to attract companies in, to help existing companies grow. We are much more focused with an intentionality on making sure that the projects and the companies and the industries that we are targeting actually have workforce mobility, career trajectory opportunities to them. So again, we follow the Brookings opportunities industry definition, which basically says you don't need a 4-year degree for some of these job opportunities that we're seeking. There is some sort of employer-sponsored benefit, whether that's childcare, maybe that's transportation in addition to healthcare, and then again, there are specific steps to career mobility and economic mobility within these jobs and these opportunities. So that is, I know, one of the things I'm very proud of at the Alliance that we're tracking and we're trending. In the last 2 years, more than 75% of the projects in our pipeline have been falling within the Brookings Opportunity Industries definition.
Yeah, and you are correct. I'm sure if Charlotte was on the opposite end of the 50 out of 50, yes, we should amend it to say cities love being ranked high.
That's right.
So, Dr. Wilson, you have a real focus on connecting Black people to technology jobs and identifying pathways into the digital workforce. Why is that such a big part of your work? I think sometimes when people hear workforce development, they think, careers like plumbing, et cetera, which that's great, but you've got a real specific focus. And tied to that, why haven't we seen representation of Black and brown people in those jobs so far? What's been keeping them off those pathways?
I'm probably going to take the opposite end of Janet on this one. I'm going to say it's not a supply issue. I don't think it's ever been a supplier talent issue. It is more of the attributes of those who are making the demands for why we don't have representation at the levels. Our schools are producing historically Black colleges and universities like Diller, like North Carolina A&T, and others are producing amazing, skilled Black talent, but yet they're not necessarily being placed in competitive, high-speed, high-demand tech jobs. I often tell the story of Howard, because it's like the case book. We always need to look at what Howard University did in DC, where they said we really wanted to ensure and create a pipeline for our students in our computer science program to be able to matriculate to Google. We will build the relationship. What do you need, Google? Google said to them, well, how about we develop a Howard West? How about we come from Silicon Valley, since clearly you're holding us accountable to how we keep your students in apprenticeships, right? Come to DC and establish a campus there. What we realize is that once again, we have bright, amazing students at our minority serving institutions and in our community colleges too. We're getting certifications on those types of levels too, that there were implicit bias from the developers and the engineers that came to train and work with our students. And to the point that the chair of the department was like, well, I don't know what else to do. We have the talent. We restructured our curriculum to meet the needs of the attributes of the company and what you think should be considered learning in this space. But yet you still don't hire our students, and you still have implicit biases about their ability to learn. And so for me, when we do our Black Tech Ecosystem Index, when we're scoring a city or digging deep on multiple variables, we're looking at the environmental cues and the institutions and structures that often create barriers for Black and brown people to matriculate, and not just, and I know this is about workforce development, but we look at the entire system. We look at how are they able to either leave their companies to start tech businesses. We look at higher education and looking at where National Science Foundation dollars go, and they often go to predominantly white institutions who say they're going to do diversity and inclusion, but lack the representation of students to actually do it. And so, and I know those are like, man, Fallon, that's a lot of race, but racism is real. It's like breathing air. It is all around us. It saturates every system we live in at the municipal level. And so not to figure out how to address these interlocking, intersecting systems is a problem for me, right? Because we can talk about, oh my gosh, we're having a worker shortage nationally. Oh my gosh, this is the season of resignation. Oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And it's in this type of fandom and excitement around this moment. Number one, you probably weren't paying people what they really earned and needed in these low-level types of career trajectories. That's the first thing. Let's be honest about that. The second thing of it is, I think we have to take more stock on looking at how companies treat and think about people. And that's not just a race thing, a gender thing, a sexuality thing, an age thing, because all of those isms create why people choose to work for you or not work for you. But I think it's like a come to a fleshy moment for us to really talk about how do we create a company culture that allows for people to thrive. And I don't think we have that here, because everything is about your return on investment. For instance, when you look at why should people do STEM, everyone says, oh my gosh, it's because we want to do disruptive things and we need this for our cities and for our states so we can compete nationally and globally. But yet again, it is not that level. The interest of a company or a state or a government to want that does not align with people's interest for driven learning, to be iterative learners in this new innovation economy, which requires everybody to go back, including Dr. Wilson, including we're living in a space now that technology is changing so consistently. We have to consistently be learning, but we have to have institutions that allow us to thrive and learn and be adaptable and malleable for this type of space. And right now, I don't think we have it. And so most of my conversations with the cities we're working in and have worked in has been around, there's like, Fallon, we can't do everything. We can't get high-speed internet for Black and brown people and then have us talk about having computer science for every public high schools. You expect for us to do everything. I do primarily because, number one, what we're doing is not working. Number two, I think if you talk about, like, once again, you have to think about how racism is, white supremacy and racism is real. It is not something that is just made up in our heads, and how it literally saturates every part of our pipeline, to the point that even when you think about those who apply for the SBIR, for the National Science Foundation, you don't have Black and Latino folks applying for these amazing competitive grants to grow their businesses so they can hire people, because Black and brown people, when they have business, they hire people that look like them, right? And so it is a challenge overall. And I think we have to have critical conversations on this. And I don't know if people really want to, because it's not immediately solving the need of the worker. Like, we need workers, but you don't want to talk about race. And it's not necessarily solving the issue of immediacy. It's a long-term struggle, which requires a lot of investment of dollars and social capital. So that's why you don't see it.
So I think you highlighted an issue there, which is, we're not just talking about the need for more certifications or different kinds of training or tweaking a curriculum. We're also talking about some of these fundamental issues like racism and the barriers that go beyond not having the right degree, barriers of, does the hiring manager look like you? Does the hiring manager, are they willing to give you a shot? And Dr. Crocker, I think that your work highlights how access to technology and digital literacy are really necessary for more than just high skill, high tech jobs. Pretty much everything. If you're applying to work the front desk somewhere, that requires internet access and knowing how to fill that out online. Paper applications are pretty much gone in a lot of places. In your work in Charlotte, what are the barriers that you've found disadvantaged communities running up against when it comes to accessing technology, and not just high skill, high tech jobs, but the full spectrum of that. And how are these barriers impacting people in Charlotte?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eli. Most things are digital first, to say the least. Applications for public benefits or to apply for housing support, a lot of that is going online now. So technology is an essential resource for living today, and there's no efficient way around that. And COVID has really highlighted that way, and highlighted that in a salient way for community leaders and for working families who may not think about how technology comes into their daily lives. Think about the parent who is now trying to support a child through remote education while also maybe working outside of the home or working in the home, or who human services workers trying to connect to clients who might only have a cell phone, not a smartphone. And, we have these assumptions, and a lot of the operations that we do, we see the efficiency in technology. Well, let's just make everything, send it out via text message. Well, you don't know if someone has the appropriate equipment to be able to receive the message the way that it was intended. So there's a lot to think about. And I think you mentioned, you call it the great resignation. I think of it as sort of a great reset that we're seeing, with people really looking at the opportunity costs for a lot of things in life. And health has a way of doing that. It's one of those, if you think about sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's one of those needs where it's like, okay, this can't be ignored. And what is that value to me in my life? I think about my local firehouse subs now that closes at 5 p.m. because they don't have workers to staff the location after 5 p.m. So you have people that are balancing the cost of childcare, the headache of traveling and on congested roads. What is the balance of that for making a non-livable wage? So we're really seeing sort of this opportunity cost rear its head. So some of the barriers are the higher educational requirements that Janet and Dr. Wilson have mentioned as well. So there are those careers that don't require the bachelor's degrees, and what are they, and how do we get people better connected to them who are also working adults, right? I think, as she mentioned as well, this is digital literacy is an ongoing spectrum. There's no one point you get to. Technology is forever evolving. Of course, I use my AOL days skills to inform how I work today, but that comes with use and adoption of technology and resources. So I think some of the other barriers we're seeing, as Fallon mentioned, the racism comes out to a lack of diversity in terms of what people see as a career that you can make a livable wage in. There's this sort of running joke, and in the Black community, when you're talking about or encouraging people to do other work, we all can't be ballers and rappers. We have to do something. There are other opportunities out there. And so what is that? And why are we not focusing on highlighting what those roles are? In my survey, which is a small survey response at this rate, so the survey is skewing highly African-American, white, average age about 41, about half are making over the per capita income per individual in the West Charlotte area. And they don't know about careers. We're seeing much more familiarity with careers such as computer user support, which doesn't require a degree, web developer, which doesn't require a degree, influencer, and engineer were the top known jobs sort of out of this list of 8 that I was sort of asking in the survey. But people were much more familiar with things like user experience designers or fiber tech installation or digital storytellers or network administration. So there's a lack of visibility of people in these roles in diverse communities that help people reimagine work and what the potential is in these positions. And so also the opportunities to, there's opportunity there, but you have to be skilled to access the opportunity. So what is the pathway to get to that opportunity is another barrier for people who may have challenges related to childcare or transportation. They may be involved in some aspect of the system at some level. So there are lots of barriers, and the overall impact of this is that the digital economy, as I mentioned, is growing, is fast growing, and low income and Black communities and Latinx communities don't have as much of an opportunity to take advantage of this sort of gold rush opportunity. They're less resilient to ebbs and flows in the market when they don't have these technological skills. I'm able to work from home, but as you mentioned, there are a lot of people who can't do that. And it's not just because there's the opportunity cost of, say, not wanting to, childcare costs more than what you're earning, but we have to look at it more holistically. So I lost my last bit there, but I'd love others to jump in, or I'll toss it back to you, Eli.
I was just gonna say, Dr. Crocker, you put it, the pin on the point, on the pin on this, and the notion that, once again, the variability and the precarity of the labor market for communities of color is very challenging, right? And so you're looking at all the external variables that keep people from understanding. But I also am gonna see, I usually try to take the weight of all of the responsibility off the people. And I know people got agency, Fallon. Institutions have a lot of capital to have a lot of agency to do better. We expect government and workforce development centers and state workforce development commissions to be able to reinvent themselves quickly to be able to do this work, right? Because technically that's why we create them. But the truth of the matter, those organizations, those commissions, those offices, those committees don't have relationships to really make that work for communities of color, right? And if they do, excuse me, they have, once again, implicit, sometimes has been my experience in example, implicit bias about what they should be doing. Once again, you look at the data, at least for first generation Black and Latino students and white students, non-students of color are more likely to say that I want to do STEM or any of the amazing STEM, computer science, because I want to be disruptive. I want to be the first. I want to be a Bill Gates. I want to be a Mark Zuckerberg. I want to be the titans of industry. But when you disaggregate it and look at for Latino and Black students, they say, yes, I like disruption, but I want to disrupt for my community. I want to ensure that my community has access to solar paneling that does, AI, intelligence, and continuous learning, whatever that IoT device they're trying to create, right? And so once again, I think it's a mismatch on how government wants, and locally, right, and companies, we want to fill the jobs, but that's not necessary. And we do care about diversity because we have those statements, but they're not necessarily looking at the interests. And to your point, the research you've done, why people choose to learn and how they learn and how they get connected to digital resources. I think I saw there was a question in the chat. We already have enough data on disparities. No, we don't. No, we don't. And not cities in particular. Cities are woefully, they do really bad methodologies, in my opinion. They never oversample for people of color. They never think about how to do different recruitment strategies and ensure that they have a representative sample. And so when they say they have done a strategic plan for a city or for a region, look at the data, look at the sample. And so, no, we don't have enough data to tell the story, because if we did, I wouldn't be here telling the story for why we have really erroneous methodologies. But I just appreciate what you said, Dr. Crocker. It is about looking at all the external variables for why it's hard for communities of color to transition on and now innovation precarious labor market, because once again, they're talking about 6G. We have yet to figure out 5th-generation technologies and how they're shifting the world of work. And now I'm in all the Capitol DC conversations. I was like, oh my gosh, what is 6? Oh Lord, y'all are moving so quickly. So even the low-level jobs of like UX, we can automate computers to develop web design and create systems that allow for full integration that doesn't require human capital, doesn't require people to be there, even the skilled thinkers like many of us on this call. And so what does that mean at all, like for everyone, but also for our marginalized communities?
So that actually leads well into the second question that I have for Janet LaBar here, which is, in your capacity leading the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, you are, leading one of these organizations that Dr. Wilson's talking about, and you're out there really doing this work on the ground to build the workforce and bring the companies. How does equity, the need to spread prosperity more broadly, the need for, greater equality here. How does that factor into your decisions and your conversations with private sector leaders as you go about this work?
Yeah, it's very apparent. I mean, I think that the business community here in the Charlotte region, again, stemming from the economic mobility study that was, now several years old, they are certainly woke to it, and they understand that we are a wealthy community, that Charlotte is too rich to have that big of a gap between our underserved, our historically underinvested in populations and communities in the city of Charlotte in particular. And so a year and a half ago, maybe not quite a year and a half ago, I know that the mayor had already approached the business community to say, hey, what is the corporate response to making sure that we, continue to see priorities and equity specifically for our Black and Brown neighbors. And so the Alliance is very honored to be co-leading some of this work alongside the Charlotte Executive Leadership Council. So again, the business community, the ones who, Dr. Wilson, to your point, have agency to be able to make some changes when it comes to, the not the limitations always, but sometimes the limitations that local government has. And so the mayor's vision really is focused in 4 different areas. One is the digital divide and making sure that there is access not only to the young students, but also to their families, to technology, not only the hardware or the software piece of this, but understanding how to utilize the technology. And so one great example that we saw this summer was Bank of America donating 10,000 Chromebooks, as well as 10,000 volunteer hours to make sure that they are getting in the households of those, again, in our community who don't know, what it's like to have a computer in their home, not only to have the computer, but have the access point of wireless, and then be able to know how to use it to search the internet, to actually do their homework. And so that is a powerful example of where the business community can step in on digital divide and technology rising. Another focus area that the mayor asked the business community to look at is making sure that our hometown HBCU, Johnson C. Smith University, thrives. And, that is in our very own backyard. And so alongside, transformation that needs to occur at Smith is also a business community commitment to make sure that we're hiring graduates from there, that we are giving them industry experience and exposure to the careers that are going to grow into the future of the Charlotte region. Another area that she focuses on is around just, again, employer commitment. So what is the corporate community doing to hire, retain, develop, advance Black and Brown talent? And the mayor is very explicit here around Black and Brown talent, all the way up into, mid-level, senior level, C-suite, CEO, corporate boards. What are we doing? And so she's literally asking us, how we're going to do that. And I think the employer community, a lot of them are doing great work here in this space already. Many of them have the ability to, because they are global enterprises that have libraries, frankly, and years behind them of DEI work. And it's not enough. And so, how do we look to some of what the larger enterprises are doing and open up blueprints for our small and medium-sized businesses? How can their commitments to supplier diversity and prioritizing diverse entrepreneurs and diverse small business owners to hold them to the same standards of, as Dr. Wilson again said, they are scaling their business. They're going to hire more people who look like them, and then you're creating additional opportunity. But if our largest employers can commit to this, and I know they will be even more, how do we light fire to the rest of the small and medium-sized businesses so that our entire community is having more holistic look at what we're doing around diverse talent in our workforce. And then the final one is around corridors of opportunity, what the city has adopted in terms of 6 key districts, key neighborhoods, again, that have not seen the type of investment, the type of economic growth that perhaps, the rest of the community has seen. And I'll use, since I'm sitting in Uptown right now, what Uptown or Valentine has seen in terms of economic prosperity and wealth. And so, the mayor is very clear that, she wants to make sure that within these corridors of opportunity, you've got really livable neighborhoods. That means, a transportation network. That means jobs that they could walk to or get to within 10 minutes. Again, going back to transportation. That means, what is small business and entrepreneurship? How do you see more of the organic growth happening? And of course, workforce development, again, making sure that the people in these neighborhoods and the communities have the tools, have the skills that they need to be able to work in their community. Again, start businesses in their community, make sure that their kids and the schools that they're in are about community, so that you have, again, with these thriving neighborhoods. And so I think, back to your question, I think that the business community has been very receptive to this. We're hopeful very soon to be able to have more information shared with the general public around how work has essentially been pulled through in each one of these 4 focus areas. For the mayor, a lot of that has been done with volunteers. Again, just the one that I co-lead around employer commitment, for example, we have a cadre of about 30 employers that are with us monthly, trying to tackle the issues of pipeline, of people, of supply chain partners. And so, again, if we can get more folks to commit to, solid goals, concrete goals around supplier diversity, again, percentages of making sure that their C-suite reflects the community, that they're working in. Those are the type of metrics and hopefully hard measures that we can use to hold each other accountable in this community to whether we're actually closing that gap or not.
I just want to say, because my chamber, the Nashville Chamber is coming to see you, I think in a day or so, I believe they're coming to Charlotte.
Oh, great.
You must tell them of all the amazing work your mayor has committed to, like the digital divide. I mean, like, those things would really help Nashville out. So tell them Dr. Wilson said hi.
We'll do that.
But I love that your mayor has made such substantial commitments. We need more mayors to do that.
And you need the private sector with you. I mean,
Right.
It's got to be a public-private partnership, to your earlier point, Dr. Wilson. I think communities, municipalities can do things on they can pull policy levers. But if you don't have the resources or maybe the private sector commitment to actually be alongside you, then, maybe you won't go as far. So thank you. I'll be sure
that
to
y'all
share
are supporting Johnson C. Smith too, which is exciting. They have a great tech innovation center there. I mean, they're doing great work. So good work, Charlotte.
Yeah.
So that leads into another question for you, Fallon, which is, what should the government at all levels be doing? Because obviously, there's a lot of focus right now on Washington and what's going to come out of, the congressional negotiations. But as we've been talking about here, local government can have a big impact. We know state government can have a big impact. And your work, really looks at a national picture, but with a lot of local focuses. And this also ties into a question Arthur Griffin posed in the chat, which is, can you suggest local, Charlotte, or regional public policy strategies to break this narrative? So, as you look up and down the levels of government, what do we need to see? What should people be doing?
Of course, everyone's eyes are on the national now, because it's about billions of dollars, both with the spending package as well as with the infrastructure bill. And those present great opportunities for like public policy and action, right? If they could pass them, but I believe they will. States will get hundreds and millions each state is guaranteed at least $100 million to talk about broadband access, Dr. Crocker. So you need to be on somebody's committee at the state level on that, side note. And so they'll have that money to talk about deployment, to talk about access, to talk about all these amazing, and also make them accessible, right? Then there's dollars coming down, which is, I think it's about 2.5 billion for digital equity, where at the state level, they're supposed to work locally to think about equity issues and race and all these amazing things, to talk about developing plans to support access and also tech workforce development. This gets me excited because Dr. Crocker, your research, we get to really make, the divide doesn't have to exist anymore. We have billions of dollars to really do it. And so at the national level, there's money. And so when I think of policy, I always think of money, because that's how we do it. But a bill that has not gotten the light of day that I think is essential when we talk about workforce development is the Computer Science for All bill. It is it was co-authored with Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and they also have a Senate accompany bill that really could push us ahead if every high school student had to take several courses or a course in computer science, and that it will be backed by federal funds. That would be revolutionary. Why? If you look at many of our public schools, and we don't have to get into an education conversation here about really funding public education because we need to fund public education, is that many of our schools don't have access to these types of instructors. Let's be clear. And so their usually pathway, right, is into career and technical education, which is not a bad thing, but it's not computer science. And I think we have to be clear about that, the levels of investments that we put there. But that bill could really push the needle and make local folks do right by all of our children and all of our communities. Locally, man, let's just talk about municipalities and what they could easily do. The money that they got through the American Rescue Plan, it would have been great to have seen them actually say, oh my gosh, let's do assessments on who actually has access to the internet. Let's not rely on the Federal Communications maps to tell us exactly who has access, because they have challenges, though it's a billion-dollar industry around there, right? Because now you have millions of dollars coming into states and going to municipalities, and they have no plans on how to use it. And that worries me for our most vulnerable populations, right? Because when we don't have a plan, then the people who are often not at the table creating the plan will suffer the most. And so what could Charlotte be doing? Charlotte needs to be talking to Dr. Crocker. It should be talking to Johnson C. Smith. It should be trying to identify at this very moment across the state and across the city, who are those can bring knowledge, expertise to talk about digital innovations, right? But also skills needed, and understand race. Those would be my immediate things, because there are dollars coming to happen, right? And let's be clear, there are a lot of amazing folks doing a lot of amazing work to support communities of color, but cities don't know how to identify them. Not because they don't exist. Once again, we don't know how to identify like champions like Dr. Crocker. Janet, I'll consider you a champion for communities of color, right? And be able to place them on the map and put them on task force and committees to lead this work. Cities rely on, I hate to say it, the good old boys, and as you said, good old boys network that doesn't allow the type of network analysis that will allow new experts to come in and to say, this is how we should be thinking about using these dollars. This is what, think about Congress, it will pass it. It'll have to go through rulemaking, January, February, March. Dollars probably won't be in hand until maybe April, May, June-ish, right? And so you have time to figure out how to play this out so that all of your immigrant and refugee communities and Black and Brown people have access. So I don't know if that answers your question. What could we be doing? Assess your city. See where the gaps and opportunities are. Build a database of experts like Dr. Crocker. Figure out at the state level, because some of our states don't have offices for broadband. I'm not sure about North Carolina, and Dr. Crocker.
We do.
I'm gonna punt to you. Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually have an office, so not just a committee or task force. Are you in conversation with them?
Yes.
Okay, then y'all are good then. Y'all are here. I'm getting off my box now, Eli.
So we're making real concrete policies and connections right here in the Zoom. So, hey, that's great. And Dr. Crocker, I want to ask you a similar question. You know, as I said at the beginning, it's been almost 8 years since the Chetty study was released and really started putting a heavy focus on economic mobility in this community. A similar question, more specific to what you've seen and what is happening locally in Charlotte, what policies would really help the local communities you're seeing here, but get the skills they need and then access the jobs that they should be able to get with those skills?
Yeah, good question. So 8 years is a long time, and that's a lot of opportunity to create change for a lot of families. So I just want to go back to the previous point I was making, that it really is about looking at upward mobility more holistically. So, you know, there's no point in putting air in a flat tire if your axle is broken, if you're looking at one aspect of well-being and work without factoring in everything. And the national debate, for me, the biggest piece for me that is disappointing, we're seeing things that are coming out of that related to, college, community college education. I'm hearing things about paid family leave. Is that, are we really looking at infrastructure and digital equity as a piece of the social safety net? I don't think that they should be held hostage because they are aligned, in my opinion, particularly for local communities and how those dollars will flow in. So when those dollars are flowing in, just to reiterate the need to partner with community-driven organizations and community partners to really understand the need from their perspective before you implement any changes, partnering with tech and human service organizations to really create that bridge from workforce to holistic, okay, I can get to work, I have childcare, et cetera. And I know that opportunity zones don't have a great rap right now, but I think there's still time to make investments. So I mentioned that West Charlotte, and particularly those census tracts were opportunity zones, and Census Tract 40 and 41. So there's an opportunity for capital investment beyond real estate for people who are maybe moving into the communities or higher dollar value homes. But there's a real opportunity to look at community broadband as a form of real estate and incentivizing those type of investments at the local level so that everyone has access to affordable broadband with enough bandwidth and a device to do what they need to do. Because, Microsoft is not the best thing for certain careers, and Apple isn't the best device for certain careers. So, just looking at not just digital devices, but holistically, how does this relate to work and life, and how people are living in today's society? Looking at workforce developments that are tied to skills and apprenticeships, getting people into jobs, incentivizing those type of relationships, whether it be tax incentives or other forms of partnerships, I think is the right direction.
Yeah, and I know we are right at 1, but if folks want to stick around, we're going to just pose a few more questions here, and just spend a few minutes to make sure we get to as many as we can, especially from the audience. Merritt McCulley asked, what are some specific lessons that we can learn from the top 5 cities in the Chetty report? And I'll just broaden that a bit. I don't know the top 5 cities off the top of my head, and don't expect you all to, but what are some lessons Charlotte can learn about workforce development, about digital inclusion, about these topics we're talking about from other cities that you've seen folks doing well? And I'll just throw that open to whoever wants to jump in.
Dr. Wilson, you unmuted first, so I'll give you the floor.
Oh, no. Go ahead. I can.
Oh, okay. Well, and Eli, again, I wasn't here in Charlotte when the study was done, and I don't know what the top 5 cities are. However, Charlotte has recently been invited to participate in an initiative that is more national in scope, but that, let me silence my phone. See, this is not pre-recorded. It's more of the, I think, Southern communities. It's actually called the Southern Communities Initiative, and it was founded by Robert Smith. It's backed by PayPal, BCG, and Vista partners. And so part of that effort is to simply think about, these Southern markets, and those are, let me make sure I'm telling you all correctly, but it's Birmingham, it's Atlanta, it's Houston, Memphis, New Orleans, and as I mentioned, Charlotte has just been recently invited to the table, but to talk about, specific things that address, more than 50% of the African-American population in the United States. And these are things like digital divide. It is wealth modernization and CDFIs. It's thinking about access to funding and capital. It's looking at workforce development issues in particular. And again, it's looking at supplier diversity. And so while I might not be answering the question directly, we are at least part of a cohort that's going to look to other markets to understand where are their best practices. What have they done to date that they've learned from and lost momentum on? What can we pull through from the Charlotte market, and what can we share as a best practice to, again, earlier comments that markets come and visit Charlotte too, and what can we share with them in terms of the commitment that, again, the local government as well as the private sector has made to these areas. So just know that there are, again, organizations like the Alliance in this community and with partners at UNC Charlotte and others who are actively looking to seek, how we, again, close the gaps in some of these more challenging challenges for our community.
I would venture to say, like I said, I know the Nashville area chamber is coming to Charlotte in the next 2 days. So it would be good for you to mention all the amazing things you've shared here, because I need our city to do a little bit better on many of these measures. I'm going to say that. But my second thing is, I'm probably going to flip the model. I don't think cities should look for others. They should look inwardly first. I think you should really look and see who are the nonprofits and who are the social impact entrepreneurs in your city that are working on these issues. Build a database, put resources around their work and do it. I haven't seen a city do that yet. And privilege, once again, people of color and immigrant communities to lead in these spaces because they are there doing the work. And I say it again, I don't think any city is moving the needle on that piece. Maybe Chicago, maybe, given all of the digital equity work they've been doing for the last 20 or 30 some years now. But for the most part, no, because we always want to say, how can we be better? And the truth of the matter is, be better in your own backyard. Look at your own representation. Identify more folks like Dr. Crocker. And Dr. Crocker, you can do a snowball sampling and she could tell you, well, I know such and such who's doing this in our Latino community. I know such and such is leading this, but we never do that type of methodology when it comes to looking for representation within our own backyard. We're always trying to say, how can I be in Austin? How can I be a Charlotte? How can I be a Chicago? Man, could I be a San Francisco or New York one day? And once again, it's giving a lot of privilege, once again, to these institutions that people are leaving. Number one, people are leaving West and East. Let's be very clear. And number two, I think you have to think, to your point about the Southern connection piece, looking at Southern states and the large majority of African-American people that live also within the rural Black belt, right, of the South, and thinking about economic development in Mississippi. Nobody wants to be Mississippi. Why? Because they have, on every measure, they do not have any type of mobility for Black people. So they're one of the most populous states for Black. Why? Right? And so for me, it's always about look inward first in your own city, identify your talent of color and make sure that they're leading in these spaces, and then talk about, I want to be like other cities. No, be the best city for your own self. So that's the cynic in me. But I do think, once again, if the notion of looking at best practice across cities and states was the thing, we would not be having this conversation. Once again, it's often the thing we don't want to do, which is the harder work of identifying and supporting people like Dr. Crocker and leadership at the municipal level to drive these conversations.
Well, I think that's a good segue into the last thing I wanted to ask, which is based on a comment that David Phillips left. He said, "Great points, Dr. Wilson. How we frame our challenges goes a long way toward what solutions we consider and develop." And we started this conversation by saying we were going to frame this around workforce development and economic mobility. After this conversation, after a little more than an hour talking about this, maybe we should have asked this at the beginning, but are we framing this the right way? And how would you reframe this conversation to address some of these issues?
Dr. Crocker, he was planning that to you.
I'm thinking, and I'm looking at some of the comments in the question, some of the comments around education about, so what there's a lot that we can do. In terms of like lost Einsteins, we know the research shows that exposure to technology at an early age is beneficial to future learning. So it is we know that schools have largely, before the pandemic, instituted technology in the classroom without understanding if their students how they have technology at home, if they do, and how they use it. So it is a piece of better understanding the needs, better connecting people so that there's visibility of these roles, what it takes, what does a software engineer do? If you don't know anyone who's in that role, how would you aspire to be in that position? Looking at work holistically, do you want to work remotely? Let me introduce you to a few career opportunities. Looking at how people want to live, to assess what skills they have, the aptitude they have, to match that with what opportunities exist in the community. And as Dr. Wilson mentioned, better connecting. It's interesting. I feel like after the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of folks are waving the diversity statements, but these are a lot of the same people who were silent beforehand. So who did you consult in those weeks to make, these assertions? So I really would encourage community-driven conversations with coalitions and other partners. I feel like I did not answer that question. I just roundabout talked. But
I don't need an answer. But Eli, I do appreciate you asking the question, because the researcher in me is like, oh, how would you reframe the conversation? Because it was about workforce development. To your point, I think the conversation is looking at all the environmental factors that we don't tend to think about, right? We usually situate it as a supply issue and look at the talent issue instead of the flip, when we should be looking at the government and the company issue, right? And how to make them better so that they can identify talent, amazing talent that's on this call, but also so that they have retained a culture and attrition rates that reflect it. I don't think we ever talk about it from what they need to do better. We're always talking about it from the lens of, we need to find the talent. Where is the talent? How can we get the talent? How can a company be better to get the talent? How can a government be better to employ strategies to really do this effectively? And I think, once again, and especially when we talk about equity and people of color, because no one wants to do that slug. I would say it's sluggish. It's not fanciful. It's not immediate return on investment for people, especially if you don't see people of color and immigrant communities as valuable, right? And so you're not going to invest dollars there. But I think moving into a minority majority world that we're going to live in, even if the census data doesn't reflect it because of racism, right? I think employers really are going to have to struggle, and governments locally and also nationally, but more so locally, are going to have to think critically about that end of the spectrum, not just about finding talent and plug and play. Plug and play is not working nationally, right? To your point, Eli, we have a resignation. To your point, I do like Tiana. I'm sorry, I know I mispronounced your name, babe. You're going to give me your right name and I'm going to say it correctly.
Tianka.
On this call. I'm listening.
Tianka. Thank
you. To Tianka's point, it's a great reset. And I think the labor market and economists, they're going to have to rethink their modeling here, right? And even more so, and I think I've said this in another panel talk, even more so for people of color and how to retain them. If your non-people of color are leaving and saying, we don't want to deal with you, I can only imagine what the environment must be like for people of color or for women who are mothers. Horrendous, right? And so I think if I had to reframe the conversation, it would be on the onus of them doing better, not necessarily on the issue of supply and talent.
Okay, and Janet, any last words? Any way you'd reframe the conversation?
Well, I do want to build a little bit on what has already been said and draw from my experience in Portland for a bit. So that, there was several years ago a technology pledge, to hire more diverse talent. And I think over time, what was found is that it really wasn't about, the inability to find the talent. It was the employer side of that was a retention issue, And so again, as Dr. Wilson has said, the employers there, the technology companies in particular, needed to realize that they needed to do things internally around culture, around hiring processes, around leadership advancement and development that they weren't doing. And frankly, they just did not know. They didn't know what they didn't know. And so that was causing, they could hire, but then, 6 months later, they were losing the technology talent, specifically in BIPOC populations, that, they were scratching their heads trying to figure it out. And all along it was around, what they needed as employers to be doing internally. But that's all I would add to the conversation.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you to this awesome panel. We will be posting this recording once it's processed on our website, and we'll send a link to everyone who registered to attend so that they can share and see it. And again, just want to remind everyone that on November 18th, we are having a afternoon symposium about moving the needle on economic mobility in the Charlotte region, what works, what doesn't, what we can do. We have a keynote address coming from Dr. Andre Perry of the Brookings Institution, and a panel with local leaders that will include UNC Charlotte Chancellor Sharon Gaber. So we've got the registration in the chat right there. We'd encourage you all to register for that, and really look forward to talking and continuing this conversation in a few weeks. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.